This chapter describes Emily Maitlis interviewing a Chippendale about the #MeToo movement at their theatre in Las Vegas. This is not a breaking news story, unlike the first chapter of the book. This is not a celebrity story. This is not about life and death, and this is not a particularly deep emotional encounter. However, this chapter subtly raises a few fundamental questions about control. Here I will share a few thoughts and provocations about the physical and psychological factors at play in the control equation. This segment of the Book Read Club asks who controls an audience reaction, but in answering this we will look at the puppet strings attached to both performer and the audience member and see how they flow beyond the theatre and have their roots in multiple economic, social, psychological constructs or systems. Who knew that the G of G-string actually stands for Geppetto? How did I get into this theatre? Well, in any entertainment transaction there would seem to be two stakeholders, the audience and the performer. However, these are simply the visible players of the entertainment interaction. Sitting behind the audience and the performer are manipulative networks that are both benign, subliminal, and malevolent in their nature. Before a performer even steps onto the stage, there is a process that takes place involving parenting, training, auditioning, building resilience, and then you have the choreographer, the director, a competitive industry that may result in the performer going beyond their physical and moral boundaries. Before an audience member takes their seat, there is an equally complex process that begins at conception, when sperm meets egg with some Barry White playing in the background. Personality. Personality guides our choices, including buying a theatre ticket. About 20 to 60% of our personality is decided by genetics, or nature. The rest is determined by the experiences we have as we grow up, nurture. Our personality guides how we interact with and react to everyone and everything around us. Clearly, ongoing interactions with parents, school and relationships are all pivotal in developing our personality, but a singular traumatic event, for example, can have an immediate effect on our personality and affect how we approach the same situation in the future. I will cycle back to this later when we discuss power and Harvey Weinstein very briefly. So our personality affects our preferences and our tendencies and our decisions. Marketing and advertising companies deliberately design their campaigns to target those preferences. They know who they want to reach and how. Everything is considered. The person on the poster, their gender, their non-gender, physique, ethnicity, body position, clothing, lack of clothing, background, colour, font, everything. So the bottom line is, when you hand over money for anything, including a theatre ticket, you've had nowhere near the level of control you think you have. Of course, if the show absolutely sucks, your preferences will change because the marketing was disconnected from the reality of the show. Okay, so that's how you ended up in the theatre, possibly watching the Chippendales. I know Alison is a huge fan. But what about your reaction to what you see? Well, clearly your personality continues to have an influence, but the magic of theatre allows for the suspension of certain rules. Each show has its own rules, and pop concert audiences react differently to those watching the works of the Bard at the National, although interestingly these can change over time. The rowdy, multi-class audiences who watched and threw fruit at Shakespeare's works at the Globe in the 1600s have now been replaced by the hushed middle classes who sit politely in heavily subsidised national treasures on the South Bank. This is a gentrification of sorts, and it's not a million miles away from the legitimisation of the act of stripping that has happened in some cases. The Chippendales have a venue, a press agent, a choreographer, a creative director, rules about who can attend. Remember, the show could not start until Emily's 13-year-old son left the venue. They also have a rule about tipping, and the Chips see this as a key difference between themselves and other strippers. Devaluing money in a strip club is a big statement, and for some it is a cardinal sin. It doesn't matter who you are, they say. Everyone gets treated the same. This is a show and you can't influence it with your money. This definitely pulls control back towards the Chips and away from the audience. Darkness. A quick word on darkness. The darkness of theatre allows for certain masquerade elements to play, where people can be less inhibited, like alcohol. Add to that semi-naked people, men in the Chippendale sense, baby oil, large groups of men and women, mob mentality goes with that, plus alcohol, and you have a sexual tinderbox of heightened emotion. Power. Some key words from the chapter all centre around a perception of where the power is. Objectification, coercion, abuse, prostitution. But a couple of words that don't see the light of day are conditioning and persuasion. Earlier in this series, my colleague Fiona O'Brien commented on the relationship between journalists and power. She noted how interesting it is to see how even hardened journalists respond to power. Be it walking through the hushed halls of Buckingham Palace to interview Prince Andrew or kissing Simon Cowell. Having power is fine, but it's not a neutral entity. It doesn't sit there waiting to be used. It's either doing good or doing harm. You might argue that power manifests in two overlapping camps, the psychological and the physical. I say overlapping because physical power, or the threat of it, is often the thing that breaks the psychological resolve of those being threatened. Military power, for example, is primarily psychological, but supported by physical things. The idea being to have bigger numbers, more soldiers, bigger bombs, larger weapons, etc., so that the prospect of conflict is so horrendous in their minds that it doesn't happen. The acronym of mutually assured destruction, MAD, continues to describe this mentality well. I won't give my power away. Loss of control, or even the prospect of losing power, makes us behave in strange ways. The behaviour of dictators across the world, across the ages, as they dwindle in the twilight of their years, is testament to this. On a different level, as a dancer, I did a show called Swan Lake with choreographer Matthew Bourne. He ditched the female quarter ballet in favour of an all-male ensemble, and I attended the open audition. At the same time, I was looking to move away from dance and to support my music career with an easy job at the back of a long-running show. Turn up, do the show, go away. However, two things happened that changed that and exposed the relationship between pride, power, and ego. Getting a bigger part in the show was not the plan. It was not in line with my long-term stated musical goals. However, when I was offered the opportunity to come to the front and learn the lead role, I didn't exactly say no. I then spent a further week auditioning for that main part, thinking, why do I want this? 2 years, 200 shows later, I retired in Paris as the lead swan. It was the last job I did as a dancer. At the audition, I was unwilling to diminish my physical power, place myself lower in the company pecking order, and earn less money. So in one foul swoop, my principles had flown out of the window on a swan-shaped ego wagon to tour the world. How can custodians of opportunity, the choreographer in this instance, wield so much power and have so much influence over you, even if what they have isn't exactly what you want? Is saying yes when you're thinking I'm not sure a result of being a social animal? Psychology says you say yes because you are agreeable, conflict averse, sociable, or weak-minded. But this describes the personality of the person saying yes, not the person with the power. Harvey Weinstein's abuse of his power has exposed the ugly side of the entertainment industry and laid bare a complex Hollywood algorithm that includes secrecy, fear, psychological and physical dominance. The control he exercised over so many people for so long is staggering, and it will take half as long again before those who stayed silent forgive themselves. But when these women stepped onto the silver screen, we had no idea. We had no idea what got them there. We had no idea what principles they had to reduce. The conflict they might feel when the money and the recognition rolls in, but somehow doubt and subservience remain. And the mixed emotions that come up when Harvey calls again. The greatest strength of the psychological dimension of power is that it is continually underestimated, not least because it's invisible. However, in the hands of a Geppetto, a modern-day Geppetto, a master manipulator, the structure of the human mind can be turned against itself quite easily. I'll give you an example. If I propose that the human mind cannot process a negative request, the human mind can't process a negative request. There is my proposal. It's in your subconscious. And then I say, don't think of a blue tree. You're thinking of a blue tree. Our minds have more back doors than a Victorian brothel, but at least when we enter a theatre, we do so knowingly. We surrender ourselves, and we want to be manipulated. It is a safe place with the illusion of danger, and that is a critical difference. As we begin to have an almost biblical light here in my office, I thought now would be a good time to interrupt proceedings and to introduce you properly to the Chippendales. You can follow my step-by-step guide to find your inner chip, harness that power, and become the Chippendale that you've always wanted to be.
Hey, you! Lazy bum, sat on the sofa. Why you sat there in the dark watching half-naked men dancing in their underwear, rubbing baby oil all over themselves? Ah, is it because you want to be a Chippendale? Well, you're in luck. I'm a bit of an expert. Here's a fun fact. 15% of the Chippendales audience is actually male. Anyway, I'm sending my 2 assistants, Chip and Dale, to help with this transformation. Rule 1. You've got to be fit. Time to blast that gut. Push-ups, sit-ups, twice a day in the gym. That should do it. Much better. Rule 2. Okay, so now you are average. The chips are gods. It's time to supersize those puny muscles. Rule 3. Get rid of that ridiculous beard. You look like a revolutionary. Chippendales don't make political statements. It's strictly entertainment. So come on, Che Guevara. Chop it off. The face is no place for a political statement. But what? Rule 4? Are those grey hairs? They've got to go. The chips are all about youth. These women are coming here to escape their sugar daddies. Nobody wants to see their granddad in a thong. Rule 5. Lose the specs. The only glasses the chips wear are Ray-Bans on the back of a Harley Davidson. Even Emily Maitlis thought the chips were a bit thick before she met them. Let's hide your intellectual prowess until you recite the Kama Sutra at the after-show party. Rule 6. Get yourself a character. Chippendales are all about fantasy. Nobody books an accountant to come and strip at their Hindu. I'm talking fireman, police officer, something exciting like that. Rule 7. Practice your basic steps. The Chippendales are all about simulation and coordination. Thrust, point, rip shirt, rip Velcro trousers, again! You are my finest creation. One final step, my friend. Stuff a banana deep into your pocket. This is because they are rich in potassium and a good source of energy. You are going to be doing a lot of jumping about. Time to sell your sofa.
So, who controls an audience's reaction? Well, if you're 6'2", 100 kilos, and a man on stage in Vegas, then you do. If you're a female stripper in a cheap bar in a suburban town on a low stage within reach of the audience, and the chances are you are scanning the crowd for money, but also you're scanning the crowd for who is likely to cause you a physical threat. Even though the physical threat never arrives, it's in your mind, because it has in the past, from a traumatic event, or it might do in the future, or you've heard about it happening to other people. I doubt the Chippendales have ever had genuine fears for their personal safety or look over their shoulders in the car park. In fact, in Emily's book and her interview with the Chip captain says, our theatre holds 350, and on crowd runs we try to get as many of them as we can. It's hard to imagine a female stripper running into a predominantly male audience of a 350 strong male crowd in the same way. Because between these two examples there are a multitude of physical variables. The variables that govern the locus or the location of power in the performer audience equation are numerous. The biological sex, gender performance, physical size, their location, socioeconomic situation, all of these factors prompt a psychological or behavioural action chain or thought process. I'll give you a few examples. You are poor. You need my money. I have money. I have control. You're small. I'm bigger. I feel inadequate. I need to dominate you. You're a stripper in a crappy town. You can't be any good. I'm in charge. Driving all of these behaviours are the personalities of the performer and the audience member in that interaction. Key factors here might include self-esteem, history of trauma, even mental health. And don't get me started on how education and religious beliefs might impact on your interaction with a stripper. Then you've got mob mentality, also known as stag night syndrome or Hindu mania. So rather disappointingly, there are too many variables to be able to point the finger and say, that's the killer ingredient that determines who has control. However, in the same way that war is 90% psychological threats and 10% physical reality, you could argue that deciding whether power is in the audience-performer interaction is 90% in our heads based on physical things that we are seeing.